The ballroom shimmered with golden light, filled with laughter, expensive perfume, and the quiet sound of envy. It was the kind of place where power spoke louder than kindness, and money decided who belonged. At the center of it all stood the billionaire, his voice sharp and commanding. His eyes filled with arrogance as he looked around for the next person to humiliate. He spotted the maid standing quietly near the corner, holding a tray and trying to remain invisible. To him, she was nothing more than background. Someone unworthy of notice, till his cruel words cut through the music. "Dance this waltz, or you're nothing," he mocked, his tone dripping with contempt. The room froze, all eyes shifting toward her. The crowd expected her to stumble, to bow her head, and walk away. After all, what was a maid compared to the wealthy guests swirling across the polished floor? But what no one knew was that beneath the simple uniform and quiet demeanor she carried a secret that could silence the mockery in an instant. Her hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but out of the choice she was about to make. Should she reveal the truth here before a room full of strangers who had already judged her? Or should she let the moment pass and remain hidden, her dignity quietly intact? The billionaire smirked, confident that she would never rise to the challenge. His laughter echoed through the hall, daring her to try. The music swelled. The chandeliers glittered brighter, and whispers began to stir among the guests. Some pitied her, others leaned in, eager to see her embarrassment. But her gaze lifted, steady and unwavering. They didn't know she was once a champion, her name once spoken with admiration on stages far grander than this. Tonight, her past and present stood on the edge of colliding, and as she took one quiet step forward onto the dance floor, the question hung in the air like a held breath. Would she prove him wrong, or would the weight of the room's doubt crush her spirit before the first note began? The silence in the ballroom pressed down like a weight, broken only by the soft crackle of the orchestra tuning their instruments. The maid's shoes clicked lightly against the marble floor, each step pulling her closer to the very stage she had once known so well. She hadn't danced in years, not since life had pushed her dreams aside and replaced them with endless hours of work and survival. But the memory of applause, the feeling of moving in perfect rhythm, still lived in her bones like an ember waiting to spark. The guests leaned closer, some whispering her name, though few even knew it. To most, she was just the maid. The billionaire's smirk widened as he adjusted his cufflinks, certain he had set a trap she couldn't escape. To him, this wasn't just about a dance, it was about power, about reminding everyone that money made the rules in this room. His challenge wasn't meant to be fair, it was meant to break her. But behind her calm eyes, memories stirred. The nights of practicing until her feet blistered, the trophies that once lined her small shelf, the way her mother's proud smile had carried her through every competition. Those moments weren't gone. They were buried, hidden beneath layers of sacrifice. She had traded the spotlight for survival, the stage for service. Yet now, faced with ridicule, those lost years seemed to call her back. The orchestra paused, waiting for a signal. The maid stood perfectly still, her hand brushing the edge of her apron as if grounding herself. She didn't answer his mockery with words. She didn't need to. The tension grew heavier, the crowd shifting, caught between doubt and curiosity. And then, just as the first note of the waltz began, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would she step into her forgotten glory, or falter before the eyes of those who doubted her? The answer was about to unfold. The first notes floated through the hall, delicate and slow, like a test of patience. All eyes were fixed on her, but she remained still, her breathing steady, her heart pulling her backward into memories she had buried long ago. She remembered being 16, stepping onto a stage in a modest gown, the spotlight burning down, her partner's hand steady in hers. That night she had won the national title. her name called again and again by voices that admired her talent. She had once dreamed of dancing across the world, of becoming someone whose grace inspired others, but dreams, she had learned, did not pay bills. After her father fell ill, she had given up competitions, taken small jobs, and eventually ended up in this mansion, scrubbing floors and carrying trays for guests who never even looked at her twice. They saw her uniform, not the person behind it. And yet here she was, called out not for her hard work, but for entertainment, cruel show. At her expense, the billionaire leaned lazily against a marble column, eyes gleaming with amusement. He thrived on the discomfort of others, and tonight was no different. To him, this was sport. To her, it was something deeper, quiet battle between the life she lived and the life she once longed for. The other guests watched closely, some whispering their disbelief. "She won't dare," one said. "She doesn't belong here," muttered another. Her fingers curled into her palm, yet the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Not because she was amused, but because she finally understood. This was not about pleasing them, not about proving herself to the man who mocked her. It was about reclaiming the part of herself she had almost forgotten. The music rose, waiting. For her first move, suspense thickened, and still she stood at the center of it all, a single step away from changing everything. The orchestra swelled, each note striking harder, faster, as though the music itself urged her to move. The guests leaned forward, their champagne glasses forgotten, their murmurs rising into a wave of expectation. The billionaire tapped his finger on the rim of his glass, a smug grin stretching wider. He was certain she would freeze, certain that her silence was proof of his power. In his mind, he had already won. But then the maid lifted her chin. Just that small movement sent a ripple through the room. Her eyes, once lowered in quiet obedience, now held a glimmer of fire. She stepped forward, the click of her heel against the polished marble echoing louder than the music. The air grew thick, suspense tightening like a rope pulled at both ends. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to sync with hers, waiting for what would come next. She stretched out her arm, fingers trembling only for a moment before finding strength. The orchestra reached its peak, violins crying out like voices from her past. For her, this wasn't just a dance, it was years of sacrifice, buried talent, and pride clawing its way back into the light. The crowd could feel it too, though they didn't yet understand why the billionaire's smirk faltered. Just slightly, as if the certainty he wore so easily had begun to crack. Still, he folded his arms, waiting, daring her to prove him wrong. His challenge had been meant to crush her, to remind her of her place. But now, as she stood poised on the edge of the first movement, the balance of power felt as though it might shift. The violins soared higher. The chandeliers sparkled brighter, and the ballroom itself seemed to hold its breath. One step was all it would take to ignite everything, to shatter his mockery, to stun the guests, to awaken the champion she had once been. And in that heartbeat, before the moment broke, the entire room teetered on the edge of revelation, just as her heel hovered above the marble floor. Ready to take that decisive first step, a sharp voice cut through the music. "Stop the dance." The orchestra faltered, strings screeching in confusion, and the entire room turned toward the source. From the far side of the ballroom, another figure stepped into the light, a tall man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding enough to draw whispers instantly. He wasn't just another guest. He was the billionaire's fiercest business rival, a man known for dismantling empires with a single deal. And now his eyes were locked on the maid. The tension snapped into something new, sharper, more dangerous. The rival's words sliced through the air with purpose. "If she dances, the game changes. You know it, and I know it." His statement wasn't meant for her, it was directed at the billionaire. whose smirk had suddenly faded into a cold, wary stare. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, confused but riveted. What game, what secret could a maid possibly hold that threatened men of such power? The maid froze in place, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected this. It wasn't just about humiliation anymore. Somehow, she had become the center of a battle she didn't fully understand. The rival's gaze softened when it fell on her, almost as if he recognized something the others did not. Was it possible that he knew her past, that he remembered the champion she once was? The billionaire's jaw tightened, his arrogance dimmed but not extinguished. He raised his glass slowly, as though buying himself time, before muttering, "She's nothing, just a maid." But his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. The rival only smiled, a knowing smile that sent a shiver through the room. The orchestra stood frozen, the dancers still as statues, while the maid stood at the center of it all, caught between two forces far larger than herself. The stakes had shifted, the spotlight burned brighter, and what had begun as a cruel game of mockery was turning into a moment that could upend everything. The next move wasn't just hers anymore, it could change the fate of everyone in that ballroom. The silence stretched so long it felt like the entire room had forgotten to breathe. Then, with a calm steadiness, the maid lowered her hand to her side and took her first step onto the floor. The orchestra